In a previous episode, Marielle and I discussed how Trump and his white supremacist base have rallied around Confederate statues, and how Trump has endorsed a monument building program which aims to extend his authoritarian and white supremacist rule. One of the obstacles to racist justice in this country is a landscape of monuments and memory which celebrate white supremacy. According to the National Monument Audit produced by Monument Lab, our national monument landscape is overwhelmingly white and male. Of the 50 most celebrated figures, half of them owned slaves. Only 6 are not white. This is our everyday public landscape. Yet Marielle and I have also discussed a rich history of counter-memorialization. During the mass uprisings of 2020, which responded to the police murder of George Floyd, many of these racist statues were toppled and replaced. Beyond that, the uprising of 2020 was a moment of cultural effervescence, a flourishing of public art that celebrated Floyd and Black life, proposed new collective visions of what America could be, and gave voice to widespread rage against the continued devaluing of Black life in contemporary America. While this creative flourishing included performance, dance, music, and other art forms, in the heat of 2020, graffiti murals were the icon of the movement. These pervasive murals, with their messages of joy, rage, and hope, were an emotional resource for protesters. They were a site of contestation, and in broader American life, they were a constant, visible reminder of the strength of the protest and the righteousness of its demands. Unfortunately, over the past 5 years, many of these murals have been taken down or painted over. Municipalities like D.C. and Salt Lake have worked to erase major, massive public mural projects which they previously endorsed. While there are still a few George Floyd murals and Black Lives Matter flags in my neighborhood in Philadelphia, and more in Minneapolis, this general erasure facilitates what the scholar Jen Jackson describes as a reassertion of white ignorance, public forgetting, and a return to white supremacist hegemony. With that in mind, we are excited to be joined today by Leesa Kelly and Amira McLendon, 2 Black activists who are leaders with Memorialize the Movement, a Black feminist organization in Minneapolis that works to protect and preserve murals from the 2020 uprising. To date, they've preserved a collection of more than 500 of these murals. They activate this collection with public exhibitions and activities that advance the cause of racial justice and abolition. I know Leesa and Amira from my own time living in Minneapolis, where we became colleagues and friends. I'm so excited to have them both on the show. So, I'm Colin McLaughlin-Alcock. My co-host Marielle Grushko is off today, but will be back for our next episode. And you're listening to Bad Art, a podcast about the politics of art in the 21st century. Leesa and Amira, welcome.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
So to start us off, I'd like to ask you both to introduce yourself. Leesa, if you could take the lead, and then Amira follow in.
Yeah, my name is Leesa Kelly. I'm the founder and executive director of Memorialize the Movement. MTM is a living archive created during the heat of the uprising. Our goal, our mission is to essentially collect, preserve, and activate the plywood murals that we've collected over the last 5 years. And we do so, we are house space here in South Minneapolis, where we house the archive and where we do preservation work and some workshops. And then we exhibit the murals annually throughout the year. This was our last year, but for the last 5 years, we hosted an annual event called Justice for George, where we would commemorate each year of his passing by bringing murals out to the community for a large-scale outdoor exhibition, brought people together for healing, reflecting, and learning through sort of the murals that were created in 2020 and also the witnessing and creation of new murals.
Yeah. And I'm Amira McLendon. I started with MTM in 2022 as as an intern, which was the capacity that I first met Colin in. I've had multiple different roles, board member, volunteer, other things. And now currently I serve as collections manager and curator now as well. Yeah, Leesa kind of covered all the MTM stuff, but that's a bit about me.
Leesa, if you don't mind, would you tell us a little bit about your inspiration for starting MTM and why it was important to you to collect and save these murals?
Yeah, so as you know, Colin, my decision to begin collecting the murals was not so much inspired as it was a trauma response. We were in a really dark period in time at that point, and the murals gave me hope, and they helped name emotions that I wasn't able to recognize at the time, and they made me feel less alone. And so it was just as simple as me not wanting to see them disappear and not being able to process the implications of their disappearance anymore. So I began collecting as a way to sort of, I hesitate to use the word save because I don't consider myself a savior by any means, but to save them from destruction or erasure or exploitation. And so that's what kind of led me to begin collecting organically in 2020. But as we collected and we garnered support, volunteers, things like that, it became more about preserving this sort of visual history, this visual record of the uprising, and less about my own trauma and experience that I was having at the time. The murals that I collected from businesses and storefronts in 2020 were originally plywood panels that owners put up in order to protect their storefronts that had glass on them from being broken into, vandalized, etc. And so business owners boarded up their windows and doors with plywood, and then community members kind of saw that plywood as a blank slate, as an opportunity to freely express themselves in true vulnerability and bravery, because a lot of the messages that they left were very deep and rooted in the trauma that they were experiencing at the time. Deep and philosophical questions to the universe about our place as Black and Brown people in society, and beautiful messages of support or solidarity, allyship, calls for justice, and things like that. And so what I collected was the plywood panels themselves that the murals were painted on. And a mural can make up anything from 1 to 14 panels. So as you can imagine, these murals are very large. Average mural size is about 4 panels. It is 16 feet wide, 8 foot high. So the murals themselves are huge and fairly heavy. Most of them are created on what we call OSB. And OSB is wood chips that have been pressed and glued together over and over again to create this really dense board. And it's usually about 1/4 of an inch thick, but we have some that are very dense, very heavy, and they're more like 1/2 an inch to an inch thick, which make them really difficult to handle. But yeah, so the plywood itself is very much a living material. It's made of wood, and although the wood has been chopped up and like grinded and pressed and glued, it's still very much organic material that is susceptible to heat and cool and water and light. It can still harbor life, and we have some murals that when we collected them, they had life on them that had to be killed in order to bring it into our warehouse. And so it's really interesting working with the plywood.
One of the things that you talked about in one of our first meetings was how, as you started collecting the murals, you began to notice differences between them. Some of those differences reflecting the different places that they were from and the different people who painted them. Could you talk a little bit about some of the diversity of the murals?
Yeah, so one of the things that we noticed as we were collecting is that depending on the neighborhood, the mural messaging and imagery was very different. And so, for example, in the Lake Street neighborhood that leads into South Minneapolis, in those areas where it's more concentrated people of color, you have more raw messages. Things that speak to our Black lives, things that speak to police accountability, crude messages like fuck 12 and prosecute the police, and more like accountability forward messages too, like silent betrayal or if you are a real ally, then you show up in this way, like messages that hold people accountable for even their complacency in the system and not showing up in ways that would help protect us better. And then in terms of imagery, it's a lot more raw, more real images, less pretty, less conventionally pretty artistic images, and more gritty imagery for sure. Like portraits of George Floyd, portraits of people hanging, portraits of other people who have died before, images of the city burning and things like that. Whereas if you go to like Northeast, for example, which is historically a more white neighborhood, it's been gentrified years and years ago. And so the population there is mostly hipsters, frankly. You get a lot of really beautiful murals that are colorful and bright and speak to peace and love and solidarity. Or even if they are saying things like justice for George, or say their names and things like that. They're saying them in very bright pastel colors with hearts and flowers and things like that, which is just it's really weird and bizarre and ironic, but it also shows you the understanding that people have of this uprising and how it affected them. With the artists from South Minneapolis and some parts of the city that are more predominantly Black, you see a lot of reds, a lot of blacks, a lot of darker colors, muted colors. But in those wider neighborhoods, like I said, you see a lot of pastels and bright colors. You see a lot of flowers, a lot of hearts, a lot of like animated figures that are more cartoonish than they are realistic. And it's really interesting. You want to add on that?
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about what you were saying about how some of the murals can hint to demographics of the areas that they might have come from. I'm also thinking about like some of the murals that we have that might have came from St. Paul, where there's a lot of Asian businesses and things. I think about that one mural that we have that says "Stop Asian Hate." Like, what else going on? There was overlap in the stories that people were trying to tell. And I think like with that mural, like that whole building was covered in murals. And it's a mix of there's the Stop Hate mural, but then there's also a bunch of murals around it that are also speaking to the movement that happened after George Floyd was killed as well.
I think the points that you both raised are so important. Highlighting one, the different demographics and the diversity of the murals. I think in the present, 5 years later, one of the things that I think gets forgotten is some of that diversity. And as people try to make claims about what the uprising was or what it meant, they tend to flatten out all of the different people who participated and who had different ideas of what it meant and perhaps different claims. And especially as you note that if some of these murals are less raw, both aesthetically, so and in terms of message, so easier to process for an audience, they can filter out some of that raw sentiment, some of the bigger anger at the police, some of the bigger demands, and make the history of the movement appear more palatable to certain audiences.
I think it's really interesting that you said that because that is exactly what my fear was since the beginning. And when it came to after collecting, like how we decided to activate and display the art, it was really important to me that we not filter out those angry, raw messages. And instead we highlight them because more even so than the pretty murals, the raw murals tell the truth of the uprising and the feelings that people had, the fear, the anger, the desperate need for accountability in this scenario. And so it's been really important to us throughout the last 5 years of doing this work that we don't let the movement become, or the memory of the movement become these pretty images with the pastel colors and the hearts and the flowers and the messages of solidarity, but that we show both in contradiction to one another, in support of one another, so that people get a very like truthful, honest, and well-rounded image of what the uprising looked like in 2020.
Yeah, thanks. I remember at your 2023 Justice for George exhibition, you had a really incredible panel of three Black artists who spoke about what motivated them at the time. And one of them, a Black woman, Leesa Carpe, talked about how she made a number of murals while leading groups of children who she knew to paint their own murals. And she felt very passionate about this. But at some point, she discovered that in the same neighborhood where she was painting, there were white artists who were getting paid commissions to make murals about George Floyd. And so there's a lot of racial imbalance in who got paid to make these murals, who made them for free, who made them as vandalism. And these sorts of questions come out in the collection itself.
Yeah, it's really interesting when we started to discover that as well, because especially in the uptown neighborhood, some of the areas of Northeast and things like that, there were people, white people in particular, who were paid to create really pretty murals and they were paid by the business or building owner to do that as a way to kind of deter their building or their storefront from being broken into or burned down. And they're like, oh, if we put a mural on our building, then it's less likely to get burned down because we'll have a message of solidarity. So it puts not only into question the fact that they should have been reaching out to Black artists and paying them if that was the case. I don't think there's anything inherently bad about them commissioning a mural to be put on their building, but it was the way that they went about it. And then also this question of how authentic or how performative is that message then? Did you just put that up there, Justice for George, Black Lives Matter, so that your place didn't get burned down or broken into? Or did you do it because you actually believe it? And then a lot of those places as well, like I said, these are the places where the messages are going to be really mild. The murals are going to be really aesthetically pleasing. The colors are going to be really bright or pastel-y. And so it kind of like counteracted the movement in some ways. And you still see that in Uptown because there are a lot of buildings in Uptown that are still abandoned, that were never able to reopen and recover from the pandemic. And what ended up happening in this like Calhoun Mall area of Hennepin and Lake Street in Uptown is that some of those building owners recommissioned white artists to paint over the original protest art that was there. And so those murals from 2020 that were on those panels originally are just completely gone, washed away now by depictions of winter or spring or beautiful white women's faces and flowers and other random shit. And we don't get that back. And they seem to think that that's okay, just to co-opt that movement and decide, oh, we're just going to do what we want with it. While you have artists like Leesa, who was leading Liberian American students around town, creating murals for free using resources from her own pockets. And then her counterparts, white artists, were being paid to make performative messages at the same time. So it's really disheartening and disappointing. And when I learned that in 2020, I made a decision. Then Amira was saying I was sort of building a philosophy without realizing it to prioritize murals that we knew came from Black and Brown artists. But going a step further, when we hosted our first Justice for George event in 2021, I wanted to make sure that there was a place for Black and Brown artists to express themselves freely in the way that a lot of them didn't get to do in 2020. So for every Justice for George event that we had, we set aside funding to commission Black and Brown artists to paint live during the event on blank panels that we provided for them. We paid them very competitively, and we provided all of the materials. We even built structures specifically made for them and creating space for Black and Brown artists and creatives to express themselves while also being free from censorship and paid competitively. So we're really proud of that.
So I think that's a good transition point. Leesa, you've talked to me before about your concerns of, well, both the importance of ensuring that Black people have control over this archive and how it's presented, but also your concerns about what would happen if this archive were instead to put into a museum run by white curators or otherwise curated differently. One of your concerns is not even sinister, right? But that a person with less sensitivity to the diversity of the murals might come in and see all of these pastels with their beautiful messages of peace and say, oh, that's a message that resonates, and elevate those above everything else. So that's really one challenge of the racial politics of representation. You've highlighted several others in our past conversations. Are there things that stand out to you particularly important or difficult about being Black activists and archivists working in this space?
Yes. It's really cool that you asked this question, because this is something that Amira and I have been talking about extensively this year in particular. Like, what are the challenges that we face, and how can we build some sort of infrastructure or foundation or institution to offset some of these challenges and empower our people to be more efficient in doing this work, more effective and more efficient in doing this work. In the catalog that we published last year, Art and Artifact Murals from the Minneapolis Uprising, I talk about in my essay where I'm talking about how I founded the organization. There was a moment in December of 2020 when I had put together a collective of people from different fields and backgrounds, all to help me plan Justice for George. And I told them, like, it's going to take archiving, it's going to take photographing the murals, it's going to take curation, it's going to take building new structures so that we can display them outdoors. And so I brought together all these different people who worked in museum fields, who worked at architecture firms, designers, artists, all these people. And in the first meeting that we were having, where we were starting to plan the event, I looked around and realized that I was the only Black person there. And that's not to say that there were no people from those fields who were Black, like, at all in the state, but I just hadn't found them at that point. And it was really disheartening, because I knew what I was doing and why I was doing it, but looking around the room and seeing myself as a minority when I was actually the leader of that group, of that meeting, just really, like, made my spirits flop. And that's sort of where my secret mission came into play, to bring more Black and brown people into this work, Black people in particular, into this work. And it became a goal of mine to expand and increase the number of Black people doing conservation and preservation work in Minnesota and in this country. And so that's one of the biggest challenges that we've noticed. So since then, I've been looking. We've been trying to find them. And in Minnesota, they are very, very few and far between. And it also needs to be said that in Minnesota, most of them are grassroots. Most of them are not, like, professionally or formally or traditionally trained. Most of them have decided to just do this work on their own, do their own other experiences in their past and their lives. And so they may be artists, or they may be archivists or professors or things like that, who have just decided that they're going to jump into preservation and start becoming story keepers and storytellers, which is really cool.
Thinking about what Leesa said, and then thinking about 2020 when she started MTM, another thing that we've been talking about especially as we started to, like, really think about how we want this archive to look as a whole, is how proactive and unprecedented it was for Leesa to have the foresight to see that these murals were something worth preserving and holding on to. Because something that happens a lot with particularly Black art and just Black history in general is that in the time when, like, something happens, there isn't anybody to do the work to save it usually. Like, it usually becomes a thought and a curiosity that people have 10, 20, 30, 40 years from the time when the thing actually happened. So in doing this work and trying to find, uplift, and train new people to do this work, part of it is so that should anything like this happen again, which unfortunately it probably will, there are people that are ready to see the value in what's happening and know that this is something that we need to preserve and hold on to
so that we don't have to do the work of digging later on.
And who are equipped with the tools to spring into action and do it.
Right. Because like another thing that I think about, which you'll love Leslie Guy's essay in the catalog when you get the chance to read it. She talked about a particular mural that was here in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. It was here in Minnesota, I believe, in the 90s, early 2000s. It was a mural created by a bunch of local, mostly Black artists. A notable one that we work with right now is Sekou Jones. He had a very pivotal role in creating this mural. And it was up, I think, for a good 10 years. And it was created by Black artists here in the community. And one day, like how you mentioned before, of different cities deciding that it was time to cover up the murals and artwork that they so passionately backed when it was first being made. The same thing happened with this mural that Leslie Guy talks about in her essay. It was up for I think over 10 years. And eventually the city decided it was time for it to come down. And there was nobody at the time that was equipped to save it or figure out something to preserve it. So it was destroyed, and there's nothing left of that mural except for a chunk of concrete that I think is in a museum somewhere. So this work is so crucial to preventing stuff like that from continuing to happen. Mm-hmm. And we're in a time crunch because it's happening as we speak.
Yes.
I think it's so important that you said continue to happen, recognizing that erasure is a constant process and something that needs to be fought against. I mean, clearly in Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, but also in longer phases of time, things have come and gone that briefly felt permanent. And now they're not there. I think in wider protest movements also you see this dynamic. And I had a student, Leesa, you met them, who curated student art and who discovered that, there's this archive of student art from 2020, which has disappeared. And so the history of the protests in the school itself is vanishing, and trying to preserve that becomes a real challenge because it disappears really fast.
Mm-hmm. Jeez.
Just thinking about that, the fact that a school would try and suppress something like that is shocking to me.
I mean, I don't even know that it's so much deliberately suppressed so much as it got filed away, and it requires active work to keep it present.
Mm-hmm. Which is the problem with museums.
Mm-hmm. That I can go on and on about the problem with museums, but it's so disappointing, and that's why our archive is alive. I feel like I've been saying this all year too. I'd proudly sit on my high horse and turn my nose up at museums because I have no formal training. I have no traditional training. And this seems like a basic understanding of how preservation should work. Every piece gets activated. And with every exhibit that we do, we're always thinking about how we can activate those pieces that haven't been activated previously. Or if a new piece comes in, even if it hasn't gone through the entire process that we have for archiving, we still find a way to work it in and activate it, because we're not burying art here. We're not burying artifacts here, The goal of this archive is activation. Collect, preserve, activate. That is in the title, in our little tagline. And that is what we do. And when you know how many artifacts museums keep stuck in the basement because it's such a hassle to bring them back up, or to recall them, or to install them, or whatever, it's really shocking and disgusting. And I think MTM, our goal is to actively counteract that.
for everything that museums do wrong, we do right. And it's not even a matter of trying to be the opposition to the museums. We're just trying to be the model of what good preservation looks like. And if we don't show that to our people, then they won't know, because they're raised to think that museums are great spaces that hold history and that they are education centers. But we show them what it can look like when education really is free and accessible, when art and artifacts are free and accessible, when everything gets activated and information is not suppressed or buried or filed away, but readily accessible. Like, even our mistakes, we display proudly because they helped us to learn how to do better for the next time, for the future. And it's just a shame that our education centers, our museums, and our historical societies and spaces like that in this country don't understand that.
Yeah. In mentioning the activating, I mean, I think it's important to say some of what that means, which is that you one, have these murals collected, but you two, bringing them out into public spaces and showing them off. And also inviting community members to participate in activities that dialogue with the collection, whether it's invitations to paint their own murals, small or large, or invitations to engage in collaborative projects at sites where you have exhibitions, and also bringing them to participate in wider community activities as part of what it means to be living in Minneapolis at this time, or in the Twin Cities at this time. So yeah, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but I just want to highlight like what it means to activate. It's actively out there participating with people, and people are engaging it directly in different kinds of ways than what you might see at a museum.
Outside of our annual exhibit, we partner with schools and universities to exhibit the murals on their campuses. And then we've had some other opportunities to exhibit, like we exhibited murals at Franconia Sculpture Park. And so we've done some smaller, like community-based exhibits, which have only been like a few panels here and there, just to like show up to a community partners event that was kind of in line with the work that we do. But then we also do Paint to Express workshops, which are a monthly kind of free come as you are paint workshop where people can creatively express themselves. And then we have interactive mural paintings, which are a really cool way for community members and like event attendees to kind of create, simulating the experience of creating a mural like in 2020, because they'll paint an interactive piece on like usually an 8x8 kind of mural face, which is very interesting. The pieces very rarely come out unscathed because kids get involved.
Which makes it like look really cool in the end, and definitely I think speaks to the community aspect of 2020 when people were creating murals, because you can tell everybody wanted to put their mark on these pieces and they did not hold back, and they were very enthusiastic in doing so.
The last one that we did for Juneteenth at Soul of the South Side, we had to hide the paint and the brushes because the piece was completely covered from head to toe, and they were still trying to add to it. Like, new people would come in. I just want to paint. I just want to write my name. It's like,
There's
it's
no
full.
surface.
There's no more surface left. You guys have painted on every surface. But people get really enthusiastic about those. And then, yeah, outside of that, we do participate in community events and workshops and things like that all over the Twin Cities, namely with our community partners. And that can be in the form of a speaking engagement, an interactive mural painting, just tabling, just showing up and volunteering. We're really active in the community in support of our community partners and the artists that we work with. And so just like as an org, we show up for a lot of things so that people know that we're not just here for the murals and we don't just expect them to show up when we have something going on. We really build a community, and it's not transactional, but it's like really symbiotic in a cool way. And it ensures that anytime we have an event, it's well attended. because we show up to everything.
On that note about people participating, I was just thinking back about some of your murals, and there are some really exciting ones in the collection that are also participatory. So it's not just you saying, oh, let's participate. There are people who painted murals that had boxes on them saying, add your thoughts, add your demands. And there are quite a few of those that you have. So it was also part of the moment itself.
Yeah, like the interactive mural idea is not one that we started, but that people in 2020 started. Some of the best murals in this collection are community murals where a neighborhood association or a well-known business or something kind of created an outline and a prompt and then left out supplies for like community to come and sort of fill it in and make it really beautiful. But one that you don't know about, Colin, that we actually collected last year is it's for me, it's one of my favorites. It's super cool because it's an interactive kind of like immersive mural. It's like 4 or 5 panels and it says, "It starts with me" in graffiti lettering. And then in the center of the like mural, there's a spot and it says selfie spot. And so like the piece like invites you to come and take a selfie in the center of the mural behind this like backdrop that says "It starts with me." And that's the first one of its kind that we have in the collection, is like an interactive piece that invites selfies. Because as you know, I do not allow selfies during our exhibits. I'm very, very much against taking selfies, but having this mural out on display has given community a space, like a designated space where it's okay to take a mural with or take a selfie with the mural, and they really enjoy that piece a lot.
Would you tell the audience why you don't approve of selfies?
Yeah. At our exhibits, it's really important that people are not blindly consuming the material present in the uprising. Like, it's less about wanting to control what they can and can't do, and more about wanting to create a space where they are actually being present and mindful and taking in what is there and the messages behind it, which can often be very heavy. And not just like, oh, I'm here, I posted this on social media and now I'm leaving. Like, I don't want it to be for spectacle or exploitation.
Yeah. And like Leesa was saying, these murals, the content of a lot of them is very heavy, and it's not to be used as a backdrop for your selfie of the day. Like
Your profile pic.
right. And then thinking about just like respecting the depictions of a lot of the people that are on a lot of these murals, whether we enjoy Floyd or Breonna Taylor or whoever else has been lost to racialized violence. I'm not really sure why anybody would want to pose with the little like peace sign in front of George Floyd's face. But should they ever think that they want to, we explicitly tell them not to.
Yes.
Because that's, at the end of the day, it's just not respectful.
Exactly.
To let alone the art, but to the people it's depicting.
Yeah. And I also want to say, like, you guys have both been out of the game for a while. Love that for you. But as someone who is unfortunately still on dating apps, you would be surprised at the number of white people who are, I'm trying to put this delicately. You would be surprised at the number of white people on dating apps who will post images of themselves at protests or with like Black things to signify to Black people that they are okay with dating them or that they're an ally, and things like that. And it's actually really disgusting. Like, I see a lot of depictions of like white men at protests holding up signs, and he took a really professional photo of himself and then he posted it on the dating app, and then he profile says BLM. And it's like, that's not helping, sir. And actually, I'm swiping left because why do you feel like this is something that you thought you could put on here to attract Black people? So it's not just like, even like, yes, there's this disrespect, but also the performative element of it, right? Oh, look at me, I'm an ally, I'm taking a picture next to this Black thing. And and they don't really realize it, but it oftentimes has the opposite effect because it's clearly performative. If you were really there and you were really there to show up for your people, then why did you need to take a picture and post it and prove that you were there? You know? And I think I also just want to say, and I think it's very different though, because we do have a lot of times where people will post a picture of a piece that really meant something to them without it being a selfie. Like they'll just post a picture of the piece itself, and then they'll tag us in like an Instagram or a Facebook post where they're talking about how much it meant to them to be there. And you know that the context then is different. So the context, it all comes back to the context.
And then just to add one more thing, we've had a lot of instances before and recently with folks taking the time to try and center themselves at events or exhibitions or whatever it may be. It's also about just not centering yourself in an exhibition that's meant to talk about something as serious as the uprising in 2020.
Yes. Like, don't make it about you. Yeah.
So I have one more big question, and that is, we talked a little bit about your work to build a Black capacity in the preservation space. And we didn't talk exactly, we talked about how you realized that when you were doing the work, you were surrounded by a white professional space. And we didn't really talk about this, but you've worked to bring in photographers and others who are Black to participate in the work to build up a Black community that's doing a lot of the work. But you've also been working nationally as part of national groups of Black conservators to try to build up a national community of Black activists doing this kind of work. Could you talk about what this means on the national scene?
Yeah, so I will clarify that we haven't been the ones to create, but we have been participating in these groups, and we've become members of some of these groups. And one of them is the Black Art Conservators Group, which was created in 2020. It's a collective of Black conservators from around the country who were sort of all experiencing both like the blowback from George Floyd's murder and the uprising, but also experiencing various forms of racism and microaggression in their own like PWI spaces. And they created a space where they can come together and discuss those frustrations, but also to share ideas, to provide a space where they can network and create new opportunities. They share like job postings. And then they actually also started a podcast where they talk about the intersection between conservation and activism. And it's really cool because sometimes the topics of conversation on the podcast deal with like defining conservation and preservation and very technical things. And then sometimes it's speaking about the field from the perspective of Black people. But yeah, so it's called Preservation for the People. It's super cool. Definitely give it a listen. But that has become a resource for us. And then we've also, as we've kind of shifted not away from conservation, but to broadening what we are and what we do, we also have found the Black Memory Workers Group, which, Colin, we were supposed to be in that meeting at 2:00. But the Black Memory Workers Group is a similar group of Black people from around the country who came together, but a lot of those people come from an archiving background. And similar to the Black Art Conservators, the Black Memory Workers Group, their skills and expertise span of a lot of various different forms of like archiving and archival materials that they handle. And they meet monthly as well in a similar fashion to kind of create a space for community building, networking, and support, but also where we can share resources. And what's really cool about that, actually, quick plug, is that since we started going to those meetings, they had a fellowship come up that Amira applied to and is actually a part of now. It was a paid fellowship that she can tell you more about.
Yeah. One of the founders of, or the founder of Black Memory Workers is one of the founders of this group called Archiving the Black Web. It's an initiative to get more Black folks into web archiving, which is something very new to both me and Leesa. I also, for the record, don't have a background in any of the stuff that we're doing besides having a studio art degree. So I can maybe speak to like the technique, but the technique doesn't really matter that much in this case of what we're doing with the murals. So I as we've been going along, learning about how to properly construct this concept of an archive that we have and make sure that we're taking care of things properly and all these sorts of things. I've also been learning alongside Leesa as we go. And they have this WARC school that they started, which is the fellowship. It just stands for Web Archiving, where they're teaching, I believe there's 20 to 22 fellows. They're teaching us the history of the Black web, all the way up to teaching us how to make our own web archive, where we have to have a practicum at the end of the fellowship and produce some sort of full web archive or the start of one by the end of the course, in which by the end of it, we have a whole brand new toolkit for archiving in a way that right now is like pretty revolutionary. This is still really new that people are still like fleshing out. And so it's cool to like have a course on people that have been doing it, teaching us their methods. But at the end of the day, like we kind of get to come up with our own methodology too. And they encourage that. So it's a really, really cool and interesting thing that we came about from being a part of all these different national Black groups that are doing all this amazing archiving and conservation work.
Mm-hmm.
That's so important and exciting. It's just thinking about, I mean, much like we're talking about how art disappears, the internet is also much more ephemeral than people give it credit for. And I think that many white people at least don't appreciate is that there is a difference, or there are different experiences of the internet. And, you know, if Black Twitter is its own sphere of Twitter, there's also a Black internet experience that is really distinct. And to save that and preserve that as a thing that matters, I think that's a really important thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So those are my big questions. I think so if listeners come and are listening to a podcast about the politics of art in the 21st century, what are things that you would want them to take away?
What do we want them to take away? Abolish museums.
Yeah.
All right.
I will say that, or I guess eloquently. Museum institutions are antiquated, racist, and have a colonial history that no longer works for the current context of our social structure. They need to be abolished and rebuilt in a way that keep in mind, that include honor and respect the rich cultural histories that have evolved in this country over the last 400 years, since the indigenous people were murdered and their land was stolen. Black people were brought here as enslaved people and then given freedom to create lives of our own. And since Mexican people were driven south of the border and then returned as immigrants, and then all of the other rich immigrant histories, because the U.S. has had their hand in their missiles and everybody else's business over the last 400 years as well. So all of those stories, all of that context, all of that history is important to the context of who America is as a country, who the United States is as a country, and to continue to operate museum structures as they are, museum systems as they are, where we prioritize and uplift only the story of white colonial history is ridiculous and wildly inaccurate. And it makes it impossible for us to move forward or learn. And it creates a cycle where we remain ignorant and uneducated. And that is why you should abolish museums.
Oh, man, I got so wrapped up in that. I wasn't thinking. I guess my takeaway, I'll say this specifically to particularly any Black listeners. If this resonated with you, like, find a space, whether it's here or if you're not in Minnesota, somewhere around you where there are people doing archiving or preservation work, because there is like community archiving and ways for you to do archiving on your own. Take it up. Like, this is something that you can do clearly without having a background in it. Like, this is something that you can figure out as you go, and you can develop your own theories and philosophies on how you do that. But I think besides that, like, the baseline is whether you're aiming to shape collective memory or aiming to just preserve your own personal history, there are spaces and ways for you to do that.
Well, thank you. I love both of those takeaways. And if someone, they are very different. I was going to add, if someone is listening and like, oh, what can I do? Memorialize the Movement's website is up there, and you can see some of the work that they've done. Also, their catalog. What's the title?
Art and Artifact, Murals from the Minneapolis Uprising.
Art and Artifact, Murals from the Minneapolis Uprising. It has some beautiful photographs and more evidence of their work. So examples that you can look at and places to get involved. Is there anything else that either of you want to hype or get people to participate in?
Donate.
Yeah.
Yeah, donate. Donate lots of money.
Tell your institution to.
Tell your institution to donate.
Yeah.
Tell your institution to reach out to us and bring us to your university or your college.
Do all of those things. Leesa mentioned at the beginning how heavy these murals are. They're big. They take up lots of space. They fall apart. They're very difficult to preserve. And so it's a lot of work, and it is expensive. So if you are capable of supporting that, you should. It's a really worthy cause, led by really great people. So thanks so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure talking to both of you, and great seeing you both again.
Yes, thank you for having us, Colin.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Colin McLaughlin-Alcock. Our guests today were Leesa Kelly and Amira McLendon of Memorialize the Movement. And you've been listening to Bad Art, a podcast about the politics of art in the 21st century. Thanks so much for listening. Please like, follow, subscribe, and we hope you'll continue to listen as we go forward. Thanks. Bye.